Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on COVID-19 and competition law. I'm pleased to have a set of excellent speakers to talk us through this topic today. From what we've seen from the action of competition authorities to date, we've seen that competition authorities have mostly looked at COVID with an eye to old economy issues, looking at supply chains, looking at excessive pricing, but today we look more at digital technologies. Before I introduce the panel, just a few logistical points for those of you who have joined us now. First of all, this talk is recorded, but you will not be recorded, and neither will the comments that you put into the chat. So there are no data protection concerns that you should be worried about. We would really like to welcome your comments and questions as the speakers progress and as the hour goes on. Please type your comments on the chat box. Before you do so, make sure that the comments are addressed to all panelists and attendees. If you do that, then everybody can see your question and react to it maybe in the chat as well. All right, so if you have any questions at all during the presentation, just email me in the chat. I will be looking at it as the speakers progress. So we have three people who will kick us off. I'll introduce each briefly, and then I will give them the floor in the order in which I introduce them. So first of all, we have Audrey Ferrazzini, who is the Senior Director of Government Affairs at Qualcomm. She has been working in Qualcomm since 2014 after extensive experience in the public and the private sector, and she focuses mostly on technologies and geopolitics in Europe. Enzo Marasà is a counsel at a law firm in Italy, Portolano Cavallo, which focuses on media and digital industries. He's been looking at competition law for the last 15 years and has handled a number of multinational clients. He has a significant amount of expertise in the field. And finally, Nicolas Petit is a joint chair in competition law at the European University Institute. He is the author of a number of publications, of which I'm going to highlight two. One is his book on competition law written in French, which is a wonderful textbook introducing us to competition law. And most recently, he's the author of a book entitled Big Tech and the Digital Economy. The title is clear, the subtitle is more intriguing, the Moligopoly Scenario. He might talk a little bit about what he has to say in that book today. So welcome to all of you, welcome to the speakers, and I'll give the floor to Audrey to kick us off.
Thank you, Giorgio. You can hear me well? Perfect. So thank you for inviting me, and such a great pleasure to be with all of you today. So I have decided for my presentation to talk to you about connectivity and competition, and the overall theme is going to be on open innovation. So with the pandemic, we've shown the real value of connectivity for all, and more than ever, we feel like Europe needs to stay connected. So reliable and secure 5G network will be absolutely crucial for this connectivity. So companies who have been able to digitalize and move their activity to the network have been more able to start their recovery. I'm just going to give you a few numbers. So a poll in the US between March and May led to a 140% increase in working from home, with some positive effects due to the time saved for commuting on site or office distraction and other meetings. In terms of e-commerce, some good news as well coming from France, with an increase of 57% in terms of e-commerce from grocery stores, and an increase as well, you will not be surprised, of 16% in the pharma sector. So we see new possibility, and as well, I would say the digital transformation of work and the possibility to work remotely also presented new possibilities for inclusion. So today is a good example as well. So to me, it's a kind of perfect segue to talk a bit more about 5G and Qualcomm for a few minutes. So we are expanding the mobile ecosystem to new industries, and we expect 2.8 billion of 5G connection by 2025. This could go up to 13.2 trillion of economic impact, and in terms of job creation, 22.3 million jobs in addition. What we see globally now, so we have right now more than 60 commercial networks in more than 30 countries. If we look at China right now, in terms of base station, we have an average of 250,000 base stations, and toward the end of the year, the numbers will decrease with 600,000 base stations. if we look at Europe, of course, the number are a bit low and 10 times less right now. But we have hope. And we believe that it's going to be, sorry, I'm going too fast. Yes, so we have hope, and we expect to see an acceleration. And I just want to mention a few names and ideas, I would say, from the council, the Telecom Council from June. I don't know if all of you have seen the conclusion, but there are some very positive language on 5G, very important for the economic recovery and industrial competitiveness. So what the council said, connectivity is critical and essential for digitizing Europe. 5G rollout is absolutely urgent. You know, it's very important to do everything to have cost reduction and boost deployment and accelerates demand, of course. There are some good language as well in the council conclusion on the need for a strong intellectual property system, and as well some, you probably heard about that because everybody's talking about it, very encouraging language on green and digital transition. So the way we see it is that the recovery plan that is going to be adopted toward the end of the year is absolutely fundamental. And we are confident we will see an acceleration of 5G deployment starting in September. So if we look at a bit of the geography right now in Europe, 5G has been deployed in 12 European countries with 22 commercial networks right now. We still need to accelerate spectrum auction, and especially for the 700 megahertz, the 3.6 gigahertz and the 26 gigahertz. We see strong deployment in Germany, Finland, Italy, the UK, Spain, and they made spectrum available. We are seeing some delays in France, but now things should go back to normal and the auction should start in September. Now I'm transitioning, I would say, to the more competition part of my presentation. A few words, if I may, about the state aids broadband guidelines. So they were adopted in 2013. And since then, of course, we had the adoption of the telecom code with completely new framework. Still, there are some a bit of things to be improved, I would say, in the guideline, and especially in terms of the target that were adopted. So in 2013, it was 30 megabits per second. So it's kind of average target. And this with 5G will be slightly obsolete, if I may. And so there should be an update on that. If we take kind of the average as outlined by ITU in terms of speed, it's going to be 20 gigabits per second. So I would say the delta is like 10 times small. Another point I wanted to mention, I would say, on the state aid regime is, especially with COVID, we've seen it, but deployment of network in rural area remain a challenge. We expect that, you know, some state aids will be dedicated to this part, but in any case, we believe that there should be a complete exemption of, I would say, the state aid regime regarding rural areas. It's absolutely fundamental. We've seen it now that for this region, you know, we need to accelerate deployment. I'm transitioning now to another topic, which is going to be very important over the course of our discussion, which is the Digital Services Act. And I will focus mainly on the ex-ante part. So if you don't know about it, the European Commission for the first time endorsed the controversial concept of digital gatekeepers. What it is exactly, platforms that have grown to become either markets or marketplaces in themselves. And in a way, they are able to privately regulate their sector. Whether and how to regulate this gatekeeper is really right now a very debated and hot topic in Europe. So it seems that for some policymakers, there is a need for new tools to deal with the new realities of the digital economies. So the ex-ante gatekeeper regulation is conceived as one of these tools. There are many that we will discuss about, but it's one of these tools. Based on the current information that we have and that are public, the intention is to establish generic rules for all gatekeepers, combined with the possibility of adopting tailored remedies. For instance, mandating access or interoperability of data. The idea is strongly pushed by some countries, such as France and Germany. And for Germany, they even launched their own legislative reform with their national competition law. The gatekeeper tool will likely face some obstacles, and at least will create a lot of discussion over the next few months. I'm just naming a few to open up the discussion. What remedies will specifically be enforced? How will it be enforced? Who could be the regulator? Likely, we might see a split between the competence of DG Connect from the European Commission and DG Comp. There will be as well the question of a kind of new digital regulator at EU level. Other question that I'm pretty sure Enzo and Nicolas will touch upon, how to combine and articulate various types of competition action. So like ex ante rules, then ex post rules. And then, sorry, we will have as well to combine potentially with the NCT, the new competition tool, which could become the third leg of the European Commission approach and would give new powers to the new Commission, to the European Commission to adopt corrective measures to correct structural problems based on market investigation. So it's kind of slightly new, not based on non-dominance and abuse. To finish with, and I'm trying to stick to my 10 minutes, Giorgio, I cannot talk about connectivity and competition policy without talking about open standardization, which is the European model that we have in Europe and the model of fundamental innovation. We call it at Qualcomm the general purpose technology, like absolutely fundamental, and an incredible value creator worldwide. Let me give you some three numbers. In terms of licensing, among so standard essential patent owners, the value created directly by us equal to $10 billion US. If you look at, when you have this fundamental innovation, the value created on top of it by the telecom market broadly equal to $1 trillion US. If you take a step up, you know, I would say the GAFAM companies, this equal to 4 trillion. So let me repeat, 10 billion, 1 trillion, 4 trillion. So it's not bad, right, for few actors creating technologies. The merit-based approach of standardization allows any big or small companies to participate in technology development on an equal footing with either larger American, with a larger Asian or American rivals. And the standardized technology like 5G is accessible to all and promotes competition. What do I mean by that, accessible to all? I mean a few things. I mean freedom. I mean freedom of choice. I mean open system. And right now I would say it's a bit kind of, you know, the hot topic, like a tool for open strategic autonomy for every state. And this is a bit in contrast of proprietary technology controlled by a single company. Topic of today, gatekeepers. So there are still some questions, you know, in terms of interpretation of the framework that we have, which is the horizontal guidelines. And to be like a bit like lawyer, a few minutes, we have in the horizontal guideline a paragraph which we call the 285 that we need a quick fix, but we have hope that this could be fixed and avoid to have misinterpretation by some actors. The way we see it,
Can you wrap up, please?
Yes, I'm finished, okay. So European standardization is an essential tool of economic and industrial strategy that Europe must support to spur growth and competitiveness. We're really thankful for being with you today, and I'm happy to contribute to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Audrey. That was a really nice overview of a range of regulatory and antitrust issues that need to be confronted. So many thanks for bringing everything to the table. So Enzo?
Sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Giorgio and the European University Institute for the invitation. I reasoned about the topic of this webinar, so competition policy enforcement in the aftermath of COVID. So what is the impact of COVID on possible future competition policy enforcement in the digital sector? And I think it has an impact. But since the COVID has created a school case extreme situation that has accelerated all processes, I think the impact is more an exacerbation of existing methods than the creation of new methods, save for certain exceptions, maybe. First, the pandemic has made evident the essential role for digital services and platforms for the continuation of many activities and functions of the economy and of the relationship between people. And this has made evident the importance of having an efficient platform with a sufficient scale to provide those services in a situation of excess of demand, of a spike of demand. But on the other side, the pandemic has also made evident that powerful platforms have the power to influence entire sector of the economics to their own benefit. So the impact of COVID in this sense is ambivalent. It cuts both ways. But similarly, the pandemic has also accelerated and enhanced the market dynamics between the platforms and the services, and so has created experience of the dynamics of the markets in the digital sector. Experience that was an element that was lacking in the competition analysis, in the competitive analysis of conducts in this sector. Now we probably have much more data, valuable data, to make market study and on the phenomena in the digital services. And it may not be a coincidence that, for example, the UK Competition and Market Authority has just issued a report on the digital advertising sector, reaching very precise recommendations on where in the supply chain there could be a regulatory intervention to curb the power of giant platforms. In turn, public authorities is indeed fine-tuning their policy interventions, and the consultation of the European Commission on the new competition tool and the gatekeeper regulation is an effect of this. However, it will be very important to see how these tools, new tools, will be implemented and coordinating between each other, because if there are overlaps or a proliferation of different authorities with the regulatory power, overlapping regulatory power, this could create more uncertainty instead of creating more predictability to the market. However, one of the probably the most notable impact of the COVID on the competition policy, on competition law, is probably an effect of broadening the objectives of competition law. The standard, the ultimate goal of competition law has always been debated, but it's called consumer welfare. But in this concept, you can weigh in different factors. And it was so even before COVID, but after COVID, it is more evident that those factors for consumer welfare are not only economic factors, but also non-economic factors, allowing other public goals to be factored in the competitive analysis and the competition law assessment. For example, fairness has become more and more an important objective to pursue with competition law. Fairness is a catch-all concept that could entail other objectives. For example, another objective that is increasingly important in competition analysis in the aftermath of COVID, most of all, is sustainability. Sustainability is becoming something that must be considered in competition law in assessment of business conducts to assess their anti-competitive potential. The Dutch Competition Authority has just issued a report dealing on how to consider sustainability as an objective to weigh in to balance the effects of a business conduct and to see whether exemptions could be granted. And the European Commission is backing this initiative and wants to clarify the objective of how the objective of sustainability may weigh in the assessment of horizontal cooperation, for example. So one of the effects of the pandemic has been to widen the important factors, the elements and the objective that could be weighed in antitrust analysis, widening the opportunity for granting exemptions to business cooperation, for example. It may also have have had an effect on the time perspective of the competition analysis in this sense. So, for example, we can see a trend in merger control to consider not only the short time effect, but also in terms of, for example, on weighing in sustainability, a longer time frame to consider the effects on competition. Another effect it has been created by the large volume of data generated by the increased use of digital services that allow a better assessment case by case of the conducts by using, for example, digital tools or artificial intelligence tools, also in antitrust analysis, to predict potential effects. However, one of the most important things that we can see is that there is now a possibility to unilateral solution from member states to the competition, structural competition problems which are inherent in the digital services. So market failures in digital environment, if they exist, cannot be tackled by single member states unilaterally and uncoordinatingly, but there must be a uniform approach, a harmonized approach. And so then the initiative of the European Commission with the new competition tool and the gatekeeper regulation could go in this direction and could be welcomed in this direction. But I'm aware and worried about, for example, the creation of a new authority for the digital service that could recall what was done in the telecommunications sector. This first, because the digital sector is not really a vertical sector, but every field, every sector of the industry is being digitalized, and the pandemic has created an effect in this sense too. Every single business is getting digitalized, and so having an authority covering the digital sector means not covering the vertical sector, but covering all the industry sectors, and this could create overlaps with the competencies of the DG competition, for example. In particular, if the DG competition is implementing the new competition tool that gives it the power to intervene without the finding of an infringement after a market study that detects structural competition problems in the market, this tool could overlap with one of the options of the gatekeeper regulation, which would tend to create case-by-case remedies after an analysis of the situation of the markets by an independent authority. This kind of overlap that could be created by these policy initiatives may also create double jeopardized risk for businesses that would not know how to address certain issues and how to frame their conducts under what body of rules to frame their conducts. One of the problems that this regulation wants to overcome, this kind of initiatives of the European Commission with ex-ante tools are aimed at overcoming the increasing complexities in defining relevant markets, because by implementing ex-ante tools, you are trying to avoid an enforcement of antitrust law based on the fundamental of the relevant market, of the definition of the relevant market. It is increasingly difficult to define relevant markets in the digital sector because digital players operate simultaneously in adjacent markets. And the power of data is that of enabling a platform to start new services or to enter new markets with a lot of information about how to win that market. And so the supply side sustainability is much less constrained than in the physical world. However, even a stricter or more effective enforcement of privacy or existing privacy rules by requiring consent for using certain data for a different purpose can curb supply side sustainability, and so create a line of business restriction without recurring to new regulation. So it is a very delicate exercise that is being carried out by the European Commission, and the consultation is very important to this in this sense. These were only very brief hints I gave. There is much more to say, but I would leave the floor to the Q&A to get into what is interesting for the audience in general.
Okay. Thank you very much for this nice overview of both policy directions and specific regulatory tools. Before I pass on to Nicolas, can I just encourage the people attending to start typing in their comments and questions so that when we then get to the Q&A, I have a bundle of questions I can start with. So feel free to quiz our experts on anything that is troubling you about COVID and digital. So Nicolas?
Thank you, Giorgio. So the topic for the discussion is competition and GAFAM in the aftermath of COVID-19. And I thought I'd say a few words about that. So I genuinely believe that existing competition economics and law are not suited for a world in which a few large companies are competing with each other across a multiplicity of markets. I believe that the existing application of the law is too soft towards digital firms that stay sluggish, idle, lazy, and rack up monopoly rents, and applications that have tipped. They display low inventivity, low innovation, and we need to go after them. But I also believe that existing application of the law fails to capture the dynamism, the diversity, and the flexibility of other digital firms, and find liability where there might be pro-competitive strategy. So the good news is that I think there's opportunity to rely on a pure antitrust approach and framework to address these concerns and operate within the flexibility provided built in already in existing text and case law. So the point that I want to make is that I think it's important to focus enforcement resources on tipped markets to maintain competitive pressure on digital organizations when it has disappeared and incentivize these digital organizations no longer subject to competitive pressure to actually compete by entry into new markets that are not yet tipped. And this has a big policy implication, which is that we should really focus on markets in which we can diagnose sort of low level of effort and find that there has been tipping, and we should be more forgiving. That the other policy implication. We should be more forgiving towards conducts and transactions by which these firms leverage market power to new markets. Okay, and so the question that I often get when I make these points is, okay, but what's the dividing rod between a tipped market and a market that is not tipped? And I say, well, one, we do not need 100% scientific certainty. In no field of science and policy, we necessitate 100% certainty to act and or consider that we have strong evidence. But the second thing is, I think we've not been looking where we should be looking, and there is a sense in which you can look at firm level data rather than market or industry data to diagnose whether a firm operates on an app, standard, or product which has tipped. The idea is that when you see firms which roll out rewards to users, advantages, perks, and so on and so forth. So for instance, you could think of Uber paying less its drivers, or increasing the fees, or placing more ads, and so on and so forth. This is a sign that the market, there's not so much pressure on that market, right? Now, there's a lot of data points that you can try to look at, and that these firms do have. It's private information, but public enforcement authorities can extract that information through use of standard investigative powers. And they can remain confidential. The agency can have them, but it should have them. Things like, of course, R&D data broken down by product, app, and segment, not firm level R&D that's uninformative of whether the particular product has tips. Product and process innovation, track record, and pipelines of active ongoing projects. Marketing expenditure broken down by app, standard, or service. Hiring expenditure broken down by product, application, segments. A lot of people forget that most of R&D in digital services is actually hiring people, right? So most of the R&D expenditure is basically labor expenditure, and a lot of people forget that. And things like, you know, divisional competition. Is the firm actually trying to pitch several segments competing against each other? So you can think of Microsoft with Teams and Skype, right? It shows a sense of the firm is under pressure to do something better. So once you've done that, so once you know you have a more certainty that the market is already tipped, you're more in the tipped category than in the untipped category, you can start to think about how to apply remedies. I'm just going to give you an example in the next minute, so to close at 6 minutes. Giorgio gave me 5. If you think of like a market like app stores, where there's a lot of controversy, and a firm has an app store, charges a fee to certain apps, what you can try to do is basically try to use simple multi-sided economics to try to decrease the output on which the firm in the tip market extracts a monopoly rent. And one way to do that, says the theory, or doesn't say, but the theory suggests, if you read it closely and you think about it, is to change the price structure, not the price level. And the idea is that you're going to be trying with antitrust to be less generous towards the subsidy side, that is the apps that basically are distributed for free in the App Store. That's Google and Facebook. You know, they don't pay the 30% fee. And you're going to be more forgiving towards other apps which have to pay the fee, and you're going to allow them ability to exercise market power strategies or bypass strategies. So basically trying to reduce, so not necessarily to sort of, you know, go after the price level itself, but trying to allow them means to be in a better bargaining position vis-a-vis the tip market, right? So that's what you're going to try to do. So on the subsidy side, you're going to be less generous to subsidized users. On the money side, the people that pay, you're going to be trying to make them pay less to some extent, and, you know, bargain better, be in a better bargaining position with the platform. And that could include strategies in which, I don't know, you know, app providers would basically decide to negotiate together, as we saw in old antitrust cases in the US, like the BMI case. All right, so you can do that. I explore all that stuff in forthcoming book that Giorgio was kind enough to mention in the introduction. It may sound complex, but it's pretty simple, and I think it's all under our eyes in the existing tax law, case law, and prevailing mainstream economics. We just need to be inventive in how we use it. Close to 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much for this this overview. So we have a number of themes that we've touched upon. So there's a question about policy direction. So a lot of you mentioned, so Audrey talked about innovation, the need to sort of use the COVID experience as a way of thinking about how the economy can be reimagined. Enzo also mentioned the growth of fairness, sustainability. And then we had a bit of a debate also about the means through which, the tools by which these competing policy implementations challenges come about. And Nicolas says if we are more smart, we can apply Article 102. On the other hand, both Enzo and Audrey pointed out that the Commission doesn't think it can be smart, and so it needs more tools. So we have a new competition tool and a bottleneck tool. And then we've also seen that the way in which we promote technology may differ from sector to sector. So Audrey pointed out that in standardization, we have a particular model, which in a sense is designed to facilitate tipping towards a single solution, which on the other hand yields a lot of efficiencies. And so there's a tension between that and some of the tools which are suggesting let's leave markets to compete and let's avoid a market becoming tipped as such. So some nice substantive points as well as procedural. I see a couple of questions have come up about goals. So I can't see everybody's name on here, but the first question was about the increased importance of non-economic factors and the tension between broadening the considerations we take into account and the more economic approach premised presumably here on consumer welfare. So maybe we can discuss that a little bit. Is broadening of the goals a danger to the economic approach that we are trying to also promote and sustain? That question was directed at Enzo directly, so maybe you can start and then maybe the others can also chip in.
Yes, thank you. That is an important question indeed. I'm not in principle in favor of broadening the objectives of competition law to non-economic factors as one can perceive this concept, because factoring non-economic factors in competition law, which should be based on economic sciences, is very dangerous, because it could get prone, more politically driven. The antitrust assessment could become more politically driven, and that is a risk we don't want. However, if the ultimate goal of competition law is consumer welfare by means of a protection of a competitive process, and the ultimate goal of consumer welfare is not only to have lower prices, but to have better quality and to have more choice in services, and services that could provide different outcome based on preferences of consumers. One of this outcome could be achieved by providing services that ensure sustainability in terms of social sustainability, environmental sustainability. It's a broad concept, but it could factor in the quality of the product, as privacy is becoming an important factor of quality of products that is being preserved by competition enforcement. You can think good or bad of it, but it is happening, and you cannot ignore it. In the same way, even sustainability can become a component of quality of a product, and so it could be important for consumer welfare to preserve the ability of differentiating services based on this kind of qualities and different preferences of consumers. That is a trend I see as having an increasing importance after COVID. So COVID it already existed before, but COVID has enhanced the importance of other factors, non-strictly economic factors, but that you can translate in an economic benefit, in the welfare benefit. However, the advent of zero price services has made evident that the price is not the only and the main factor to assess competition.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the other speakers want to chip in on this?
Yeah, I have something to share. So the question in the session was, has COVID sort of changed anything? And what has it changed, and what is the impact on competition policy? And when I really think really hard about that question, to me it seemed that COVID-19 is one more drop in the buckets for all the angry people and the perception that the world is on fire. Okay, so we've been going through a lot of traumatic events in the past decades, and COVID-19 is just another incremental instantiation that the world is on fire. And since we are living in that perception that the world is on fire, there is a tendency in the public opinion and in the policy making structure to think that we need to use every tool that is available to uphold preferences that emerge. And for instance, you may want to broaden the purpose of corporations. That's a discussion that's taking place in the United States to go beyond, value maximization for shareholders and do sustainability. You want to broaden the scope of the tax system to introduce, new taxes like, the digital tax, because you want to finance other things. And you may want to broaden the scope of policies like competition policy to embrace other objectives like sustainability, inclusiveness, and so on and so forth. And so I think COVID-19 moves us incrementally even more towards that, okay, the world is on fire, we need to use every lever of governments to actually improve things. Now, I think there's a danger here, because by doing that, we're actually helping and the cause of the real populists, who will tell you that the fastest route to achieve the preferences is authoritarianism and dictatorship, right? So pure executive power brings you much faster towards some preferences than the slow process of antitrust enforcement, or the slow process of lawmaking by legislatures, or the slow process of tax harmonization in Europe. And we need to be extremely careful, because the more we give in to that, the more we will show the inefficiencies of the existing tools, which were not designed to do that, and the more we will provide demands for more radical swings in terms of how we do public policy. So I'm very, very concerned about this.
Okay, thank you very much for that broad-ranging insight. Audrey, do you want to comment, or?
Maybe just a few words, but Enzo and Nicolas covered so many points. From my perspective, I would say the way I see the approach from the European Commission is it's a combination of many things, and a bit like Nicolas said as well, a combination of many tools. But if we look at the kind of the three legs of the approach from the SA, you have something which is, we haven't touched upon it, but the e-commerce and the liability regime, which has been I would say a big fight for a couple of years. And it's true that the directive was adopted 20 years ago and the world was very different. We have as well, I would say, this kind of ex ante, which is more like economic regulation to tackle some systematic problem, let's put it that way, and trying to how could I say that? Maybe to embrace a new way of where the digital world is going. And then you have the enhancement of the competition tool. But there is an underlying discussion as well that Nicolas mentioned, which is, I think, important, not just for the GAFAM, but more generally as a society. And we've seen it as well with COVID. And it's all this discussion regarding democracy and fake news, which is underlying on many things, but it's as well important. We've seen so many things rapidly, spreading around everywhere, and you have this kind of question of some companies who might have, power or much more power than some states. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that some people start to be very nervous about it, and it might increase, I would say, the policy machine as well. We need to do something, and all of that is happening in a momentum where everybody is kind of nervous, and we do have a lot of uncertainty.
Okay, yeah, so the urge to regulate maybe needs to be curbed a little bit, which leads nicely to some of the comments that have been made by the participants. So I'm just going to summarize a couple of points and then ask you to respond. So one question is whether the COVID crisis has changed the image of the GAFAMs. So Amazon being more efficient, I think Enzo mentioned this, that e-commerce is boosting. Audrey gave us the numbers. Facebook as well allows people to connect. So does that have any impact, do you think, on the way in which antitrust enforcers look at them? And then another person made a similar point about the relationship between the government and platforms in so far as maybe they're also rivals. I mean, Audrey already said that, sometimes these firms are sufficiently large, but the example that was given in the chat was the provision of public services like tracking apps, and who is doing this? And it's the private sector that is facilitating more innovative solutions to tracking than governments appear to be capable of doing so. And this person also raises the question, what's the link between the fact that it's the government that is actually putting some pressure on competition authorities to do some of this work against the GAFAMs, and what is then the relationship between the state on the one hand and the private sector on the other, which then leads to a third point which somebody made is democracy a relevant factor in competition law? Anybody want to take any of those? Maybe I'll start and then you guys can think. The first point on the sympathy, the Commission has not stopped its cases. The US will have hearings at the end of June. So I'm not so sure that COVID-19 somehow magically removes the cases. In fact, the cases just keep continuing as if nothing had happened, which is interesting in itself, that nothing changes. On the relationship between governments and Google, there's a book published about 5 years ago called Mind the Gap, where Angela Daly discusses the relationship between state and power and private power. And she raises the question as to whether these two are hand in glove. So she talks about a possible invisible handshake between the two, so that to a certain extent, governments sometimes may tolerate larger undertakings because it benefits from them. And she looks at that dimension. On the other hand, others will say that no, the link between competition and democracy is that competition should keep market power at bay, precisely because we want to favor a diversity of competitors. And so there is a vision which suggests tipped markets may be efficient, but maybe efficiency is not all that we want, and we would like to see diversity as much as efficiency. Of course, the way to respond to that is, as Nicolas said, is to just keep tipped markets honest by applying competition policy or not applying competition policy in such a way that the tipped markets are not able to regulate the market. So the idea would be to prevent private power from acting as a regulator. And that's in a sense that the regulatory tools should do that. But anybody else want to come in on state market? Yeah.
Yes, no, on the perception of GAFAMs, of or the power of large platforms after the COVID, I think the COVID, as I said, it cuts both ways. So on the one hand, it has made evident the beneficial role of very efficient platforms which exploit well their network effects and can provide very efficiently delivery service in a situation of lockdown, for example. Absent a tipped market, maybe we wouldn't have had all the range of services we needed during the lockdown. Maybe not everywhere, maybe some benefited more than others, but I think this is a thing. So, and the government also was happy, I think, to have a powerful platform that was able to deliver essential items. I live in Italy, and in Bergamo in particular. It's my hometown. I live in Milan, but I was in Bergamo during the lockdown. And I realized how it was important to have a delivery service without relying to the traditional postal operators, because they were not efficient. On the other way, however, so the government is happy to have the possibility to use such a powerful and efficient platform for essential services, but they are worried that they will take over. So they want to control such a platform. So it's ambivalent, the effect. And they are even more worried when the government sees the power of such a platform. They are happy to provide services to citizens, but they want to control that platform. They don't want the platform to take over a sovereignty role, or a role that is normally of the state. And so this creates the tension. As I said, it cuts both ways.
Giorgio, can I touch upon a couple of points? Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So on power, I think we need to be extremely careful again here, insofar as we are in Europe, we are discussing European policy. There is a sense in which the world of ideas, thanks to globalization and digitalization, has become flat. And in the ongoing discussion in Europe, we also import a lot of embedded and implicit value choices, judgments, and issues which are very American in nature, very North American in nature, and very less centrally European in nature. And all this discussion about power has certainly a lot of merit to it in the United States, where money is everywhere, where the rules on campaign financing and advertisement buying and a lot of idiosyncrasies to the North American culture are at play, where there's no minimum wage, where, you know, where labor markets are much less regulated, where health insurance is, you know, very private to some extent. I mean, regulated, but very expensive and not universal. And so if we bring all that into Europe, but forgetting explicitly that the environment is very different, we have a lot of regulation of labor markets, public health systems, campaign finance, and so on and so forth in Europe, we risk using this sort of, you know, rhetoric of power and competition in a very misguided way. We have instruments that we use, they are dedicated to these issues. We should not stumble upon the illusion that the power problem that exists in America and that leads to an antitrust discussion, because in the United States, antitrust has a central political role, is transposable in the European idiosyncratic system. And that's why I'm so often pushing back against the hipster antitrust, or people use these words, but I don't like it. I call them neo-structuralist discussion. I push back. I say, this might make sense in North America, but it doesn't make sense in most countries in Europe. And so let's not buy in. I mean, you know, when I hear, you know, major policymaker in Europe, you know, discussing with a major protagonist of the neo-structuralist movement and say your ideas are great, I'm like, have we forgotten something here? All right, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, that's a very useful reminder that there is, culturally, we might want to think about markets differently in different member states, in different jurisdictions because of the particular market configurations. Okay, we have only a few minutes left and a number of questions in the queue. So I'm going to start with one question, which I thought was perhaps just to keep following the discussion, which is about, are we forgetting dynamic effects? So is competition policy been forgetting? The author talks about a 3D world where you cannot develop antitrust without thinking about dynamic effects. And does COVID-19 perhaps push us to think about dynamic effects in a different way? Anybody want to take that?
I think, yes, yeah. Again, it has not created a new perception of dynamic effects, but it has accelerated the awareness of how dynamics effects are important in the digital environment as well. We have seen, as Nicolas was pointing out during our previous conversation, we have seen during the lockdowns certain new services from platforms that were almost unknown before becoming more and more prominent in a very quick manner. So there is no really stable and persistent dominance in the digital market. It's true that when a market has tipped, competition is and innovation is maybe discouraged from competitors, but it's also true that in a matter of very few years, or because of a new event like the pandemic or even less, there could be a new nascent services very quickly that could scale up very quickly. So dynamics competition has become more important, not because they were not important before, but because they've become more evident, probably.
Yeah, in a sense, we have a nice natural experiment where we can actually see the relevance of this more visibly than in an economics textbook. Nicolas, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah. So as Enzo and you were saying, COVID-19 gave us a very nice natural experiment of the actual capabilities of a bunch of firms that we call GAFAM, and the actual capabilities of new entrants in smaller organizations that we believed were in the kill zone or that sort of stuff, right? And so, if you take Zoom, for instance, Zoom was having discussions with Facebook about joint products and so on and so forth. Facebook didn't really see that Zoom would be the next the new kid on the block and the next big game in town. And so what's amazing is that this observation about expansion and entry is one that's not confined to Zoom. As Enzo was saying, in countries like Italy and France, firms like Amazon have scaled their operations in a matter of weeks by orders of magnitude. And so we're not talking, and by contrast, a lot of non-digital firms, as Audrey was saying, have been struggling to adapt. And so the question is, are we seeing here more adaptive firms than the non-digitalized ones? Are they the agents of resilience? We've talked a lot about that, resilience. What's a resilient economy? And might that be an economy in which you have these dynamic organizations, right? And also in tracing apps, as a commentator was mentioning in the chat, the two firms, Google and Apple, sort of jumped into the vacuum to provide some technology here. So we can see that. Now the question, of course, is, so there is a sense in which these firms, they do some stuff which is really bad and deserves antitrust remediation, but they're also very dynamic, very flexible. They can pivot very fast, right? What space do we give to that in public policy? And the second question, and I think that's a really hard question for policymakers, but no one ever asked that. We've spent 15 years in Europe, applying antitrust aggressively to promote interoperability, untying, and choice. And in 15 years, we've not seen, by contrast to the United States, the creation of any new large organization in digital. In other words, the European economy, despite aggressive investments in a certain types of antitrust policy designed to create horizontal competition, has not produced, that investment has not produced one large firm creation in digital. So the question is, do we double down on the investment and put more units of enforcement and resources into that kind of competition for horizontality, interoperability, diversity, choice? Or do we want to change the policy? Because I think a lot of people would love to have a European GAFAM, right? A lot of people would love us to have a European economy which creates, so the question is, why isn't Doom a European company with all the antitrust investment that we've made in 20 years? And a policy that is said and sold as a policy that promotes innovation. Why that? And I think the reasons, I think I know the reasons, but it's a hard question, and that is a question we should ask.
Yeah, that's intriguing, because there is a narrative which goes like this, that the reason for the Chicago School in the 70s was precisely to lay off antitrust to allow firms to grow. And there was a concern that the judgments in the 60s, like Brown Shoe, were stifling the emergence of industrial champions in the US. There is a question on the chat which is addressed specifically to Audrey, and she's happy to discuss it, about the relationship between GAFAM and 5G. And the question is about the business models that GAFAM are entering with 5G and how this changes the market for 5G technology. So perhaps you want to discuss this.
Thank you. So it's a very broad question. So I'm going to try to narrow a bit down, okay? And trying to link as well with what Nicolas just said. So with 5G, I would say, from my perspective, it's a way as well for Europe, to tackle, because 5G will allow many new applications. And I would say it's not for like new entrants in a way, it's for everybody. But the technology is done in a way that in order to have digital transformation is going to be extremely important. And so what we will see, it's probably much more conservative industry, much more resilient industry, will be able to really, really move fast and forward to develop new services. So it's, I would say, kind of agnostic platform. So anyone can jump in. So of course the GAFAM can jump. It's open and accessible to everybody, as I said, but probably what we're gonna see, and it's kind of one of the strengths we still have in Europe, if we take, for instance, the automotive sector, or if we take in Italy fashion, for instance, we do have a lot here in Europe, and with the new technology, the way that we can transform manufacturing, for instance, or the way we do production, or as well the way that we, another example, transportation, the way we transport, we have very good infrastructure in Europe. It opened up new opportunities. Another point I wanted to mention, because when I read the question, I think there is another side of 5G, and it's everything that is related to Open RAN that I wanted to mention. So basically, it's going to be a virtualization of the network, and so it will allow new entrants. Not just big companies, I know that we're talking about the big one as well, but small companies will be able, in fact, to develop new services thanks to the technology. And so if we take example, for instance, in Germany, they're putting a lot of money to develop new services, and especially, I would say, for small companies. I think they're going to put like 2 billion on the table and develop clusters. I'm understanding as well that in the UK, they are going in that path. And so the technology allows to create many, many things, but I would say that some governments see this could be a competitive advantage for a lot of startup, to really tack up. And some, as I mentioned, Germany is really like putting a lot of money on the table on that. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. That was really, really helpful and insightful. Okay, I think we don't have a lot of time, but there's one more question which we can have a quick bite at, because it's not something we discussed, which is, what about merger control and economic survival in COVID? And so the question from Linus is quite radical. He says, what about we skip notification? We just allow firms to merge because survival requires us to allow firms to merge without regulatory scrutiny.
There are middle way solutions, just to jump in.
Okay, go on.
Because, for example, in Italy, we have a pre-notification system, but no standstill obligation. That could be a solution for certain simplified mergers, for example, that European Commission could look at. So for certain types of mergers only, for example, where there is no overlaps in relevant markets. However, if you turn to the digital environment, it's difficult to say that there is no overlap between relevant markets, because as we said, platforms operate simultaneously or very quickly in new services just by leveraging on the data gathered on other services. So the market definition limit could not work in that field. However, it's true that the failing film defense has gained a new revival with the COVID, but because of a crisis, even more than with the 2008 crisis. We've seen something probably in the digital sector in UK with food delivery services. We have seen that a merger that was not about to be approved was approved because of the failing film defense. So recognizing the need of reaching a sufficient scale to operate efficiently in the digital markets. In this sense, it has had an impact of mergers, even probably in the time perspective of analyzing the impact of the merger. It may have made longer the time frame to see the effects on competition of the merger.
Okay, thank you very much. Do the other two want to come in on merger control?
I'm happy to throw a thought. It's a predicate for ex-ante merger control that it's too hard to divest exposed, right? It's too hard to disaggregate exposed entities which have been combined, right? That's a standard, but I mean, there's others, but that's the sort of major reason. It's a practical reason. The question is, is this practical reason still present in digital economy organizations, all right? So it might make sense to say it's very hard that two steel corporations with melting equipment, they merge, they basically discard one, send to scrap heap, and and then you can't just undo that. It takes years to build that kind of capacity, right? And so the question is are things different in digital? And so we can see that data are modular, and that engineers and R&D labor is also very modular. I mean, there's all this discussion about non-compete clauses, which means that engineers move from one company to the other, they can be repurposed, and so on and so forth. So we see all that dynamism and flexibility. And so the question is, do we really need ex-ante merger control for digital? So in areas in which assets and capabilities are extremely modular, that you can repurpose at will. Firms themselves do that. So it would not be crazy to think that after an antitrust indictment, you would ask the firm to actually repurpose or disaggregate data and teams. And with that comes the next question, which is, okay, we can do away in this, we might do away in these sectors, but we might need more proactive exposed instruments to intervene when we see abusive exercise of market power. And that ties into what I said before with regards to intervening in tip markets, going faster, and doing away with certain procedural constraints. That's my high-level feel about it.
Okay, no, that's interesting. Audrey, do you have any thoughts on this to wrap up, or?
No, on merger, I think that there's nothing to add. But if I may add one point, Giorgio, that I forgot to mention too before, if it's okay for you.
Go on.
On the, we mentioned a little bit the issue of the tracking app. And not commenting on what happened, but maybe talking about the future. And this is something that my colleague Sabrina flagged to me. So how I would say industry players can really, work together in standardization. There is a group right now with C3GPP who is working. It's 36 companies and government, I would say. It's a partnership, but they're developing an app which will be open to anyone, and any government will be able to use it. And it's a partnership with many players to avoid to have this kind of bottleneck, whether we like it or not. But I would say for obvious reason, there is a need, and because of COVID, when we need to work together, we can, and we can help government as well, and everybody. So I just wanted to mention it. I don't know yet when it will be ready, but the work is led by Orange at Etsy, and soon we should see it.
Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful information. Right, I think this is almost all the time we have. So I just have time to thank, first of all, the people who've sent in the comments, many nice questions. I hope we managed to cover the majority of them in the time we're allowed. I hope you also got some good ideas, and there was lots of information and opinions from the speakers, which I think were really valuable and stimulating points for discussion about how to redirect competition policy, how to think about industrial policy and the relationship with competition law. We perhaps didn't discuss the new competition tool and the bottleneck as much as we would have liked, but you've seen some hints about the potential institutional problems that arise when trying to regulate with multiple diverse instruments, and we'll see over the summer how this debate progresses. So it just remains me to thank Nicolas, Enzo, and Audrey for their fantastic presentations and their able comments to these very different questions. So thank you all, and well, enjoy the rest of the Friday and have a good weekend.
Thank you, Giorgio, and thank you everybody for the organization.
Yeah, thanks to Giorgio and everyone in Florence and the other speakers.
Indeed, yes.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.